If I want to understand what you are saying, I must listen to you. I must listen to you with affection, with care, with attention. Because I want to find out what you're saying. But if I say, yes, I agree with you, I've heard this before, or you're saying something new which is impossible, you'll not listen, you'll not listen, you'll not listen, you'll not listen, you'll not listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
When the darkwood fell before me, and all the paths were overgrown, when the priests of pride say there is no other way, but tilled the sorrows of stone.
No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it.
I did not believe because I could not see, though you came to me in the night. When the dawn seemed forever lost, you showed me your love in the light of the stars.
America is today the strongest, the most influential, and most productive nation in the world.
Cast your eyes on the ocean, cast your soul to the sea, where the dark night seems endless. Please remember me.
Understandably proud of this preeminence, we yet realize that America's leadership and prestige depend not merely upon our unmatched material progress, riches, and military strength, but on how we use our power in the interest of world peace and human betterment. It commands our whole attention, absorbs our very being. We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
When the mountain was before me, a deep well of desire, from the fountain of forgiveness, beyond the ice and the fire, cast your eyes on the ocean, cast your soul to the sea, where my talk might seem endless, please remember me.
The U.S. Federal Reserve Bank issues every dollar bill, yet it is not run by the U.S. government or any elected official. It is owned by a private banking cartel.
But here I find the chairman of the Federal Reserve, who's in charge of the dollar, in charge of the money, in charge of what the money supply is going to be. The middle class is being wiped out, and nobody's understanding that it has to do with the value of money. Prices are going up. So how are you able to defend this policy of deliberate depreciation of our money?
A lot of it depends on what happens to the price of oil.
We share this humble path alone. How fragile is the heart.
What is the proper relationship, what should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. what we think is the appropriate thing. What the relationships are don't frankly matter.
Cast your eyes on the ocean, cast your soul in the sea.
Families of banking who own and run the Federal Reserve also run the 4 largest oil companies. Oil is also used to make and run machinery and current mechanical technology. Of course, there's one industry that needs these more than anyone else: the military-industrial complex.
Let's move on to the next question. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jenny. I'm a sophomore, and this is for all 3 of you. Can you say in 1 sentence or less what... you know what I mean. Can you say why America is the greatest country in the world?
Diversity and opportunity.
Lewis?
Freedom and freedom. So let's keep it that way.
Will?
The New York Jets.
No, I'm going to hold you to an answer on that. What makes America the greatest country in the world?
Well, Lewis and Sharon said it: diversity and opportunity, and freedom and freedom.
I'm not letting you go back to the airport without answering the question.
Well, our Constitution is a masterpiece. James Madison was a genius. The Declaration of Independence is, for me, the single greatest piece of American writing. You don't look satisfied.
One's a set of laws and the other's a declaration of war. I want a human moment from you. What about the people? Why is America
not the greatest country in the world, Professor? That's my answer.
You're saying...
Yes.
Let's talk about...
Fine. Sharon, the NEA is a loser. Yeah, it accounts for a penny out of our paycheck, but he gets to hit you with it anytime he wants. It doesn't cost money. It costs votes. It costs airtime and column inches. You know why people don't like liberals? Because they lose.
If liberals are so fucking smart, how come they lose so goddamn always?
Hey, and with a straight face, you're going to tell students that America is so star-spangled awesome that we're the only ones in the world who have freedom?
Canada has freedom. Japan has freedom. The UK, France, Italy, Germany, Spain,
Australia, Belgium has freedom. So 207 sovereign states in the world, like 180 of them have freedom.
All right.
And yeah, you, sorority girl,
just in case you accidentally wander into a voting booth one day,
there's some things you should know. And one of them is, there is absolutely no evidence to support the statement that we're the greatest country in the world. We're 7th in literacy, 27th in math, 22nd in science, 49th in life expectancy, 178th in infant mortality, 3rd in median household income, number 4 in labor force, and number 4 in exports. We lead the world in only 3 categories: number of incarcerated citizens per capita, number of adults who believe angels are real, and defense spending, where we spend more than the next 26 countries combined, 25 of whom are allies. Now, none of this is the fault of a 20-year-old college student, but you nonetheless are, without a doubt, a member of the worst generation ever. So when you ask what makes us the greatest country in the world, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Yosemite? Sure used to be. We stood up for what was right. We
fought for moral reasons. We passed laws, struck down laws for moral reasons. We waged wars on poverty, not poor people. We sacrificed, we cared about our neighbors, we put our money where our mouths were, and we never beat our chest. We built great big things, made ungodly technological advances, explored the universe, cured diseases, and we cultivated the world's greatest artists and the world's greatest economy. We reached for the stars, acted like men. We aspired to intelligence. We didn't belittle it. It didn't make us feel inferior. We didn't identify ourselves by who we voted for in the last election, and we didn't scare so easy. We were able to be all these things and do all these things because we were informed by great men, men who were revered. First step in solving any problem is recognizing there is one. America is not the greatest country in the world anymore. Enough?
What is the military-industrial complex? You just got done listening to two of the greatest presidents of the past century telling you and warning you about it. So, what were they really talking about? To understand it, you must first understand the language in which it was spoken of, and then you must also understand the men who did the speaking. The first speech you heard was President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States. President Kennedy was known primarily for his dedication to the civil rights movement, and for his vision and support in launching America's Apollo space program, which eventually resulted in America landing on the moon. Sadly, and even morbidly, he is most probably well known for the conspiracy surrounding his assassination, months shy of having served a full third year as president. The speech you heard from him was a speech entitled, "The President and the Press." Many people call this speech the conspiracy speech or the secret society speech, but in actuality, it was President Kennedy making an appeal. Now, a plea for help to the media, and we'll talk more about this in a moment. President Kennedy assumed the office of president after President Eisenhower departed, having served 2 full terms or 8 years as president himself. President Eisenhower was a special kind of president, though. His list of credentials before becoming president are very unique, and the overwhelming love and support of the American people before he even considered the office of president make him a uniquely interesting president. Eisenhower, or Ike, as he was known to the world, had held the rank of not only 5-star general during World War II, but he had led America and her allies to victory in Europe over the Nazis as first Supreme Allied Commander. He managed the war in Europe and along the Atlantic Ocean, and he later became the 16th Chief of Staff of the Army. He also became the first governor of the Allied territories in occupied Germany after the war. No other military figure has ever had as much experience, knowledge, and information about the American military structure as General Eisenhower had. As president, Eisenhower was able to draw on his expertise, influence, and reputation to end the Korean War with China and break up the crisis situation on the Suez Canal, ending the invasion of Egypt. He began to point out to the citizens of the westernized nations the dangers of a communist and socialized system of government. He pushed the American Space Agency to compete with Russia after the launch of Sputnik, and he oversaw the rise of the technologically based military and nuclear arsenals as the world transitioned into a new era of warfare. The massive machinery of the American Defense Department and the concept of black budgets, coupled with the unrestricted and unmonitored research and development of weaponry, were virtually non-existent before President Eisenhower. He saw an imperative need for the American military to develop new weaponry as humanity moved into the space age and began to harness the power of atomic and nuclear energy. He also believed that America needed to expand her area of influence around the globe to better protect herself from hostility, not through takeovers and invasions, but by becoming the model of a humanitarian and free, open society. He believed in powerful military defense, but he held to the idea of government by the people and for the people. So when Eisenhower warns you over half a century later, you better pay attention. He knew what the military-industrial complex is because he helped create it. Being as he did in fact have this unique and intimate knowledge of such an institution, he was distinctly aware of the dangers and abuses of power which might and probably would occur. The speech you heard after Kennedy was President Eisenhower's farewell address as he prepared to leave the office of president. It is curious, then, that such a powerful and highly esteemed leader, known throughout the world, would choose to spend his last few valuable minutes of airtime to not deliver a heartfelt and sentimental speech addressing the decades he had spent serving the country, but rather he chose to warn the American citizenry about the beast which our government had begun keeping chained in the basement. The question many of you are asking still is, what beast? Am I talking about our military, our sons and daughters who don the colors of this nation each day in the spirit of service and dedication? Their leaders in the field? Am I insinuating that our military is evil? Perhaps I'm just railing against industry. Not at all, guys. I hang my flag, I love our soldiers, and I support them in their missions. I spend my money on this economy, and I follow our laws. I actively vote, and I believe it is every citizen's duty to do so, but intelligently and being well informed. So, what really is this military-industrial complex, then? The military-industrial complex is an informal or unofficial and untraceable alliance of the military with related governmental department and privately owned defense industries, which holds the potential to influence governmental, societal, educational, medical, environmental, technological, and economic policy. The money which feeds this entity comes from Congress in the form of a blank check with no legal obligation to admit, disclose, or even discuss what the money is being spent on or where it is even being spent. Do you really think our government buys $5,000 hammers? So when, or if, which is probably the correct assumption for most Americans, you pay attention to the news, or even better, C-SPAN, and they talk about black budget spending, this is what they're referring to. This is what they're talking about. Some of it is understandable. You know, we develop new weapons all the time. Stealth bombers were around decades before the public knew anything about stealth technology. Drones, too, they were in development in the 70s. America had her first jet fighter plane in the 1940s. Did you know that? But the thing you have really got to wrap your brain around, if you even want to have a chance at realizing what I'm trying to show you, is the understanding that the federal government does absolutely nothing without having more than one purpose behind it. The impression most people have of a giant, inefficient Goliath of red tape and ignorance, it's just a show for us. There are endless examples of this, from the genetic mutation of our food supply, the stripping of the content from our education system, the pitting of one societal class against another, to chemtrailing, electronic banking, RFID, and the true purpose of FEMA. But sadly, we've all been trained to reject anything that conflicts with what the teaching of mainstream society believes. And honestly, most of you wouldn't even have a clue of what I would be referring to anyways. And that's okay, for now. Look, I don't necessarily expect you to believe like I do, but I do hope that you will at least listen to what I have to say before you try and debunk or compose your arguments against it. My only desire is to ensure that we are all thinking for ourselves. We're all on the same rock together, yet we're struggling through this life, alone or in small groups, friends, family, on guard against everybody else. Is that how you really think this life should be? As Ferris Bueller said, life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. My friends, we've been missing it. There are things which have been going on for decades, even centuries in some cases, which are so hidden, so secret, so carefully guarded, that unless you seek the answers for yourself and you don't just automatically accept the first official sounding answer you hear, you're not going to be able to see what has been right in front of you all of your life. And once you do uncover that first truth which you're trying to reveal, you're going to find yourself a new life. You're going to find your view of the world that you live in forever changed, and you're going to find yourself with a new and liberating sense of empowerment. Are you still with me? All right, good. But I'm sure you want to know how all this ties into the presidents have been dead for over 60 years, the Federal Reserve, and our military. So hopefully you've given a moment to think about what you've already seen and heard. Hopefully you've already made a few mental connections on the subject matter. Hopefully your education has not failed you and you can understand the language we're speaking here. Let us continue. The significance of the Kennedy speech as it relates to the dire warning left by Eisenhower is this. The President and the press speech was made shortly after Kennedy began his first year in office. Keep in mind, he spent considerable amount of time in the company of Eisenhower at the very beginning of his term, and he was the first person to assume stewardship of the defense industry in its new and greatly expanded form. If you read the entire speech, you can see that it is very much a plea to the media to remember their responsibility and maintain their integrity. He warns the media of a threat working within their own ranks. He warns the media of an unnamed enemy which seeks to undermine the Western world through the use of media and political means. In fact, he is repeating and expanding on the same threat which Eisenhower was warning of. Remember what Icke said. We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method. And if you don't understand what all that really means, then you'd better get yourself a dictionary. You'd better ask someone you trust. It is that important. Kennedy tried to explain things better to the public, and he was trying to alert the media to their duty when he spoke the following words. We are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. He said it all, right there. What we are to look out for, where to watch for the enemy, within our own military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political machines. It is also very interesting that he chose the word conscripted. You should look that one up. So now, the first level of debunkers you're going to come across when you're trying to get to the bottom of what I'm telling you will shout this down, this premise, with statements like, they were talking about communism. Well, nowhere in either of those speeches did either president say the word communism. Not once, not one time, not one word. At that time, we had just come out of 2 decades of war battling against fascism and tyranny around the globe. And these were men, not the polished, oily, spoon-fed prima donnas we've had ruling us for the past few decades. These were men, and they weren't afraid to call a thing what it was. If they'd meant communism, they would have said communism. Others have stated that the two spent so much time because of a friendship or they had some sort of mentor-like relationship. But once again, if you seek the truth for yourself, you will see. Eisenhower is well recorded in history as having voiced his dislike of Kennedy. They did not enjoy each other's company nearly so much as the debunkers will claim. Icke had reservations about Kennedy, and he was afraid he wouldn't have the courage or the nuts or the ability to handle the monumental duty which was being passed on to him. And the plot thickens even more if you look at the words of our 28th president, President Woodrow Wilson. Wilson had been maneuvered by political action groups to institute sweeping changes and labor reforms on a scale never before seen in American society until just recently. Now, investigative reporters, they have a phrase they like to use when they're tracking down a story and the leads are kind of running thin and they're doubtful or non-existent even. They say, follow the money. Woodrow Wilson basically single-handedly signed over the treasury and economy of the United States into the hands of a private bank. And that private bank, called the Federal Reserve, prints out your money based on nothing other than how much wealth or poverty they feel the American citizen should have. Nowadays, they also own most of the mortgages and loans where the civilian public have signed themselves into, increasing debt. The confusing mess of a few years ago, which prompted the whole Occupy Wall Street movement, was all about taking those market-driven items out of the hands of small and independent banks and putting them into the hands of the Federal Reserve. So now, we have one single entity, or 4 families, who own your money, your politicians, your housing, and the oil which our country is addicted to. They own the food producers, and they are smothering family and community farming with their scientifically and genetically mutated crops, which the courts have given unbelievable amounts of power to. We'll look into Monsanto more in the next few videos, but look it up. It's there. It's the same 4 families over and over, and they answer to no one. One bank owns the United States. We all work for them, and you really don't have a choice in the matter if we continue to play by their rules. So look at it now, and compare it to the warnings we were given. This alone is damning enough if you truly understand what it means. But if you still don't see it, or refuse to consider it, then listen to Woodrow Wilson's own words. He said it himself, to the extent he felt was possible, and make no mistake, he was scared to utter the words. After signing the Federal Reserve Act, he was quoted saying, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined our country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of our nation, therefore, and all of our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have become one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. His own words. But you'll find a bunch of debunkers, and you'll hear some saying that's accurate, and you'll see a trail when you try and track that down. But don't go by just that one. You can find it in print yourself. Woodrow Wilson later wrote a book entitled The New Freedom, a call for the emancipation of the generous energies of a people. In this book, he wrote the following words. Since I have entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the fields of commerce and manufacture are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere, so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, and so pervasive that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. The language is hard to understand if you're not very well read, so if you need to whip out the dictionary again to understand it, please do so, and do it now. To a vast majority of Americans, in this current age anyways, particularly those of you born after the 70s, the structure and form of our language as spoken by previous generations amounts to little more than a large cluster of big-sounding words drawn out in long-winded sentences, and the meaning's pretty much vague at best, complete gibberish for the most part. The sad fact of the matter, though, is that the language and syntax, which a modern 20-something-year-old American could struggle to understand, was well understood by even most 10-year-olds at the time in which it was spoken. The English language is one of the most complicated languages in humanity, but not just because of all the technical rules in which it exists, but because the English language is a hybridized mixture of words and phrases from cultures all around the world, and the words we use are numerous and they have variable meanings. We use our words interchangeably. We use negative words to describe positive opinions in our slang and our phraseology. We project our emotions using words which have absolutely nothing to do with the subject matter at hand. Think about how your casual conversations play out. Someone could pronounce every word perfectly, understand our sentence structure completely, can define every word we use. But if they were experiencing our culture for the first time, they could very easily end up totally lost if they were, trying to eavesdrop in on you and your friends or coworkers having a conversation. Nowadays, we do most of our communication by analyzing the words being spoken and then comparing it to the body language of the person we are speaking to. Or we spend our conversation time just hammering out LOLs and OMGs on a keyboard. In this modern, amazing, and technologically explosive age, we pat ourselves on the back for the hard work and sacrifice made by our ancestors and tell ourselves how great of a society we live in. We claim to bask in the glow of the pursuit of excellence and human compassion. But meanwhile, the American citizens have allowed the United States to plummet as low as 37th in the world as far as our medical abilities are concerned. Our mathematical abilities place 27th. Our sciences are ranked 22nd. The literacy, reading, and comprehension rank 7th. There are Eastern and Baltic nations who speak and understand our language better than we do, even with the accents. And for most of those peoples, English would be the second, third, or even fourth language they've learned. This is crucial to the truth. This is how you have become disarmed without you even knowing that it happened. How many of you listening to me have never been inside of a library? Old cliches such as knowledge is power may sound hokey, but it's true. How do you know what has been hidden from you if you cannot even understand the language it was written in? Do you see? If someone has to explain every old piece of news footage, every old presidential speech, every monumental decision, declaration, or founding document, how many people do you think would care or even notice if a cartload of old black and white film or stacks of news reports or legal decisions were thrown in the dumpster or incinerated? Who'd cry out in opposition? Let me ask you this. How many of you knew even the slightest thing about President Eisenhower before listening to me? How many of you even knew what the Federal Reserve is? Not what I have shown you, but just knew what the Federal Reserve is responsible for in the official story. The simple truth, in a nutshell, is that we have become almost parasitic as a society. Parasites. We're a welfare nation suckling from the tit of government programs, feeding on a failed education system, and we no longer even feel the desire to reach out and expand our knowledge. We no longer set out to read, experience, and ponder the answers to our questions. We consume myths and lies told by the television and radio as true reporting, and we're even now letting this failed education system determine how our kids are going to be raised. Now consider, if you will, that some unseen power is indeed eating away at a nation. It could be any nation. Short of outright war, how could it go about taking that nation over? The big threat of communism in the 50s and 60s was the fear that it could take over the media, take over the education system, take over the healthcare, nullify religion, making any moral concerns irrelevant. It would instigate class, race, and societal warfare and thrust the citizenry into poverty. The population would be under complete surveillance and control. But what if the population was alert? What if they were well informed? You could either wait for the older, more informed generations to die off while you poison the mind pool of the younger generation, or you could invent reasons to imprison them. Or, if you were powerful enough, you could simply load all of those people in opposition onto trains, cart them far out of sight, and begin to execute them. Then you could begin to raise the next generation in ignorance, dumb them down in the schools, limit their dreams and aspirations to carefully told half-truths, keep their minds, relationships, finances, and daily affairs in chaos so they do not have the time to stop and look around once in a while. Make drugs and alcohol abundant and affordable. Once you have their money, education system, healthcare system, housing, food supplies, news and media, communications, and legal systems under your control, you can control the life or death of any number of people you choose, just as easily as Caesar did when he gave a thumb up or thumb down signal in the ancient arenas of Rome. To the critics of the whole military-industrial complex notion who still insist that Kennedy and Eisenhower were referring to communism, I will say this: they may indeed have been referring to communism, if that's the name which they were applying to the behavior and actions which they were warning the American people about. But it makes absolutely no difference at all which country or nation we were opposing at the time. We were not told who to guard ourselves against. We were told what. And that argument still falls flat because they both stated that the enemy was global in scope. So, as we reflect on the United States and our victory over communism, we should stop and ask ourselves, what did we really conquer? If you take into account Woodrow Wilson's own words, the words of both the last and current chairman of the Federal Reserve, who's on his way out now, the grave warnings of our past great presidents, and when you stop and consider how the fabric of this nation is really stitched together, can you ask yourself, did we win the battle only to lose the war? There is another lesson to be learned from the Spanish Revolution of 1936. The leader of the revolution, Francisco Franco, was an ally of Adolf Hitler and his Axis forces. Franco had attended several of Adolf Hitler's speeches and had learned from Hitler how to take over a nation using a democracy. His civil war was a revolution supposedly based on a struggle between fascism and democracy. The plan, though, was to win a democratic freedom and then use that system, coupled with news and propaganda, economic control, and propped up domestic threats, to tighten a noose around the powers and abilities of the freely elected officials, to the point where he could institute a police or martial state and become the sole ruling authority of this supposed democracy. And it would all be done by the hands of the people themselves, as they had handed over their individual freedoms to the whim of the government. It was fast, obvious, and bloody, but the lesson remains. Couldn't a more subtle, ruthless, pervasive, intelligent, and powerfully funded handful of individuals do the same thing, pull it off without hardly anyone being the wiser? What if you had decades to do it? You'd have to snip away at the laws, slowly probably. You'd have to make new laws in their place, and you'd have to convince the public that it was all done at the will of the people. Closed-door sessions, friendly media would be definitely helpful. And if you could either dumb down the people or make the language of government so confusing that only a lawyer could understand it, then it would become even easier. There's an old quote which says, "The best prisons are the ones where the inmates can't see the bars." Are you still so sure of your freedom? Look, if you want to test it out, you don't even have to fact-check me. though I do encourage you to do just that. But regardless, it is a very simple test. It's the only way you will ever know if you are living in reality, or if you have indeed been played as an ignorant fool, helping an unseen master keep you in chains. The stakes are high enough that you should want to find that truth out for yourself. The joke's been on you for long enough. And don't be scared to find the truth out either. Millions are starting to wake up, and the momentum depends on every one of us wanting to know for ourselves. However uncomfortable it is to discover that you have been made the fool, you're not alone. Those who are seeing it have all gone through it already. It shattered my worldview personally. I so wanted to be right. I was sure of it, in fact. That's how deeply runs the lie. If you go to your doctor, you got some unusual condition, he runs a few tests and then he compares it to the results on his list of known symptoms. It might be obvious, like a broken bone or a sucking chest wound. But for the more tricky stuff, where he's got to investigate, where he has to analyze his findings, those tests and observations of your condition and symptoms allows him to make an educated guess, or a diagnosis, if you will, about what is wrong with you. Oftentimes, your doctor might already know, even before he sets eyes on the problem, if he even can set eyes on it. But his tests are probing for a result, a symptom. That's all he's looking for in the results, the appearance of an anomaly or a symptom which is linked to a certain known condition. For the better part of an hour now, you've heard about a disease which is lurking out there somewhere, and you've had the symptoms of this disease presented to you. If you want to examine the truth of my words, then be your own physician. Apply this list of the symptoms to the problem. Fact: America faces an unseen enemy. Fact: you have a bona fide, straight from the horse's mouth list of symptoms that you're able to look for. Don't accept anything less than the truth, and for that to happen, you will have to do the hard work of looking for yourself. Develop your ability to research a subject, find a course to take if you need to, and learn how to use search terms on the web correctly. I cannot stress enough how important it is for you personally to try and spend at least 1 hour a week researching and learning about your history and the world we're all claiming to be a part of. And don't be afraid to use the translation abilities of the internet to read and research news, politics, and sciences from the other nations. It is no mystery to those of us who have realized what is really going on, or are starting to, why the Western world has been trained to fear, despise, and or hate other countries and their belief systems, or what you have been taught about them. It is amazing how many of us walk around with a strong opinion one way or another about another country, yet so few of us have actually ever been to them. We just repeat what we've heard from official sources. There is so much more to discuss, but for now, I'm going to leave off here. In the next few episodes, we will examine the astounding worlds to be found within each of these symptoms individually. I hope you found this to be informative and thought-provoking. Some of you may already be familiar with the subject matter which I just presented, so if you feel that I've left anything out, please feel free to comment. Until the next one, friends, find your calm and have no fear.
One hears a lot of words. And hearing many words is not listening. It's like a noise among the leaves. Soon passes away. When we hear, we either accept or reject. Or we translate what we hear according to our knowledge, our background. Or we compare what is being said to what is already known. Or we oppose one idea by another. All these characteristics of hearing denies the act of listening. The act of listening is entirely different. When one listens, there is no comparison, there is no acceptance or rejection. The quality of listening is attention. And when you attend totally, with your whole mind, with your heart, with your nerves, with your eyes and ears completely, in that state of attention, there is the act of listening. And that act of listening puts away anything that is not true. When you give your whole attention to something, that is, when you are completely listening, you listen to the totality of the thing. When you attend, there is no borders of inattention. When you so intensely listen, you listen to the slightest whisper that's about you. So in the same way, when one listens, that very act of listening brings about a total attention in which you see the totality and the whole significance and structure of what is being said. If I want to understand what you are saying, I must listen to you.